Let's see. Hi, everyone. Just taking some time to make sure everything's set up. We'll get started here in the next couple of minutes as more people join the webinar. We have chat and Q&A is open. I'll be saying this again once we get officially started, but if anyone can't hear me or can't see my screen, or if you have questions at any point, yeah, feel free to jump in with questions, jump into chat. I'll drop a message in there. Okay, great. I'm seeing there's more people joining. If someone could chime in and just confirm that video and sound are good. Great. Oh, thanks so much, everybody. You're wonderful. Okay, good deal. Cool. So it's 5 o'clock. Thank you, everyone who's here. I'll do kind of a brief intro just while we let maybe a couple latecomers jump in here. Anyway, my name is Kate Travers. Thank you so much for attending this webinar today. I'm very excited to talk to everyone about a topic that's near and dear to my heart, how to work with developers. Yeah, this is a talk that I've given a couple times, and I'm extremely excited to be giving it again for everyone here today. Yeah, and actually, so I'm seeing now a little bit of chatter. I think that most attendees are muted for the most part. So I would say I'm very happy to make this more of an interactive conversation. I have lots of exciting examples to get through, but please, at any point, if you want to jump in with chat or Q&A, please do. Happy to talk to folks. Yeah, I'll be monitoring both those channels throughout the talk. Okay. All right, let's join in, folks. All right, so as I said, everyone, welcome. My name is Kate Travers, and I will be talking about how to work with developers. This is perspective of someone, of a software engineer. I'm a developer myself, and so this is my take on how to handle this challenge that a lot of us are up against. So yeah, my goals for today's talk, a lot of times, and this is pretty common in a lot of different industries, people tend to be intimidated by engineers, or kind of vice versa. There's a lot of miscommunication from both sides. And so today our goals, is I'm really hopeful, my goal is for everyone to walk out of today's webinar completely confident that you can work effectively with your development team, because it's for the best. We're going to go over a few strategies to make those interactions productive for both sides. Yeah. And so, kicking things off, developers. Why are we even having this talk, you know? Are they really so different from the rest of us? Yes, we are. So, case in points. Here we have an adorable picture of my current engineering team. This is the Flatiron School's development team. You can see we're sitting in a bench outside. It's probably not where you typically see engineers. Why? Why are we sitting outside on a park bench? Well, this happened last summer. This is moments after our office was evacuated because there was a literal dumpster fire outside. You can't make this stuff up. So it happened around 5:30 in the afternoon. I think it was like a Thursday or something. And most people in the office did exactly what you would expect. It's 5:30. So they packed up, they went home. Not the development team. Without any communication or like, we didn't talk to each other about this without any words. Every single one of us picked up our laptops, walked outside, and then sat down on the closest park bench and just, got back to work. So that's who we're dealing with here. That's hopefully a good example of why developers, they're not like your average coworker. But the thing is, in addition to currently being a developer, I'm also a boot camp graduate. And so I've worked kind of on both sides of this divide. I've worked in technical and non-technical roles. And so I like to think that I have hopefully a fairly unique perspective on how to bridge this divide. From what I've seen from my experience, it all boils down, not surprisingly, it's always just a matter of miscommunication, which is actually a good thing, because that means with a little empathy from both sides, we can totally bridge this divide. It's doable. And you know what? We really want to bridge this divide because it's in everyone's best interest. No matter what role you're in, being able to communicate with the other side is 100% one of the most valuable skill sets that you can bring to the table. For engineers, in terms of recruiting or career advancements, it is absolutely true. You can talk to any hiring manager, an engineer, given equal skill sets. The engineer who's a better communicator is going to be valued as a better contributor to their team. They're going to be perceived as better, than an engineer who, maybe has better technical skills but poorer communication skills. And the flip side of that is also true. A person working in a non-technical role, if you can speak developer, that's perceived as extremely valuable because you can talk to those engineers and, you're speaking their language. So they're more likely to get stuff done that you want them to do. So it's totally in everyone's mutual interest to bridge this gap. So let's talk about some strategies on exactly how to do that. So one of the biggest blockers that I've seen is actually, we talked about miscommunication. It's the actual vocabulary that actually gets a lot of people tripped up. And anyone who's had a conversation with the developer is hopefully shaking their heads right now or nodding their heads and being like, yeah, absolutely. So thought one of the first things we could do is let's go over some common vocabulary and just clear up any misconceptions there. And again, feel free to jump in, chat, Q&A, and I can answer any, clarify further if, on any of these. So first off, let's talk titles. Even in this intro, you probably heard me throwing out some words interchangeably. I've referred to developers, engineers, programmers. What's the difference? Honestly, you don't really need to sweat the details. In general, you don't need to. It all boils down, these are people who spend their day writing code. That's what I do, that's what most engineers do. And that's kind of all you need to know as far as these titles go. They can more or less be used interchangeably. And I'll be sharing these slides after the talk. Of course, there are plenty of circumstances where you do need to see the distinction. So I've got resources you can check into if anyone's really curious about the distinction between these different titles. But yeah, in general, it's people who write code. All right. Another thing you'll hear teams talking about and how engineers spend their day is feature development. We can touch really briefly on what that process looks like for a lot of startups. I'm going to speak as a developer. Most of my experiences has been in smaller, smaller mid-sized startups. So I'll be using those environments as examples. But in general, most startups, their feature development cycle is going to look very similar to this diagram that you're seeing here. You have a couple different roles at play. Most times you'll have a product manager or some sort of manager who's going to oversee kind of the ideation phase. They have this backlog of features that need to be done. The next step is they'll identify this discrete set of stories or tickets. It's kind of these discrete units of work for a sprint, for a period of time that people will be working on them. And they'll gather all those stories together and then assign them to their development team. So, and that's when we jump into the actual sprint cycle of this. This can be as short as a couple days or as long as maybe a week or two. Tends to be pretty short though, most startups. And during that sprint, you'll see the upper one, your day-to-day as a developer is you will work through each of these stories or tickets, kind of one by one. You'll have daily stand-ups with your team. You'll be in communication with your product manager the entire time. But you're slowly but surely working through each of those tickets that's been identified for this sprint. Once it's done, you're going to hand things over to, well, hopefully a QA person, but some sort of quality assurance process, somebody who's testing. And so you work with them to kind of test before the launch. And the final step is actually delivering this beautiful feature to your stakeholders. And then, yeah, you'll hopefully review everything together. Ideally, one thing that's nice and that is helpful for our team is we always do a retro. We kind of all get together after the sprint is finished, talk about what went well, what could have been improved. But yeah, then the cycle repeats itself. So that's kind of like a quick overview of if you've ever kind of asked yourself, you know, what do engineers actually do? Like, what does their day look like? This is a little bit, hopefully a kind of a high level picture of what that looks like. So yeah, and talking about that, you heard me mention stories or tickets. That's a term. You can see some examples of this here in this screenshot. As I mentioned, when you're building something, you kind of tend to break down what needs to be done into very discrete units of work. We'll refer to them as a story. You can see some examples, you know, here. You can manage your tickets. There's a million different systems for managing your tickets. Our team really likes using GitHub projects. Anyone who's used Trello, you probably recognize the interface. It's very similar. But you can see, like, as you move through each of these cards, you can kind of show what their status by just, you know, like what column they kind of live in. So yeah, when you hear developers talking about like, oh yeah, I'm working on that ticket, it's just a discrete task that they're knocking out that's going to be part of a larger feature. Cool. All right, so keeping going. Another thing you hear thrown around a lot, you'll hear engineers referring to something known as the stack. You're like, oh yeah, what kind of stack are you working with? They're like, oh, it's cool. We have a really cool stack at Flatiron School. What does it actually mean? So I've got the Wikipedia definition, which is always exciting. A stack is essentially, it's a set of software subsystems or components, and it's all of those subsystems that are needed to create a complete platform that supports your application. So you can see kind of this cool picture here, which is great. Let's spend like half an hour analyzing it. It's pretty complicated. Yeah, just kidding. We are not going to do that. Mainly, I like to include this slide primarily just to, I don't know, just to scare people. It's one of those fun diagrams that engineers will throw around, like boxes and lines. You'll see these high-level abstract things being explained with these boxes and lines. We love to do it. But in general, like for most people in a non-technical role, and honestly, even a lot of your development team, this high-level view is kind of as far as you need to go. If you ever ask an engineer to describe your company's stack, they'll probably sketch out something that looks pretty similar to this. It'll kind of show you like entities and relationships between entities. Super abstract, not very detailed. And honestly, that's kind of as far as most people need to go. As far as general understanding, you can like a good analogy that one of my team leads likes to use is kind of like a car engine. To be able to drive a car, you kind of don't need to know about all the individual components of an engine and how they interact. You can kind of take the gist of it and go pretty far with it. Think about gas goes in, force for turning the wheels comes out. So yeah, don't ever sweat having a perfect grasp on something as detailed as like your full software stack. We've got dedicated people who get to sweat that instead. Yeah, in general, it's just stuff that supports, that makes sure, that keeps your application running. Yeah, some more terms that you hear pretty frequently. These are some terms that are used to describe like the type of developer you might run into, you know. You hear someone saying like, oh yeah, we're looking for a back-end engineer, or oh yeah, she's a really good front-end developer, or yeah, honestly, everyone on our team, and actually this is kind of true, like at Flatiron School, most of the, on our engineering team, most of us are full stack developers. And so what these labels are all referring to, you can think of, let's start with the back end. So when we talk about the back end, it's the stuff that you can't really see. It's everything that's under the water here, if we're going to use this iceberg analogy. The back end kind of supports the rest of your systems. It's a lot of the data handling. I've listed some of the languages that are used on the back end. You know, you'll use Ruby or Python, or you know, there's Java and JavaScript and all these different things. When you talk about the front end, that's what the user, that's the type of, that's coding and whatnot. It's going to be visible to the user. It's stuff that they're actually going to interact with. And you see it in like your user interface and your user experience. People who are programming that code are programming with as front end, for programming the front end side of things. And what's nice about front end is that there are really only 3 languages at play. It gets a lot more complicated than that, but it does boil down to 3 languages, because modern web browsers only support these. The 3 languages listed here as front end are the 3 languages that your browser can support, and that's true for all browsers. So if you're a front end developer, you spend your day probably writing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That's what it all compiles down to. And then full stack, as you might guess, those are people who can write a little bit of everything. They're more of a generalist. They're probably not specializing in either realm, but they can get the job done doing back-end stuff or front-end stuff. Super versatile. It's people who wear a lot of hats. Yeah, and that's a great question. Someone just asked, wait a second, JavaScript is in both worlds. What's going on with that? It's true, and that's one of the ways where the distinctions between these labels, they are super fuzzy. They are super blurry. In general, it would be hard to find a developer whose entire job is entirely back-end or entirely front-end. By necessity, most people, especially people who are working on websites and web applications, just by necessity, you'll end up working in both worlds. It's super blurry. The lines are super fuzzy. Yeah, and languages like JavaScript is kind of cool. You can use JavaScript to power your backend, you know, things like Node. But it's also on the front end. It's right there in the browser, you know, making things move and yeah, just interact with things. So yeah, so again, like keep in mind, if you hear people throwing these terms around, like, oh yeah, I'm a full stack developer, I'm a front end. Those are going to be, they're very broad descriptors, and in especially most web developers you run into, they're probably working in both worlds for the most part. So cool. Let's hit the next one. Here's a fun one. So this is another term that gets thrown around a lot. APIs. Everybody's always talking about, oh, we really need to get a public facing API, or like, oh, we're going to hit the Twitter API to, I don't know, do whatever you want to do with Twitter, hide all the terrible tweets. So what is an API? What does that actually mean? So all it boils down to, it stands for Application Program Interface. And in the technical sense, so like an API is something that defines an interface where developers can then use that interface to request and then receive data from a data source. So use it to a programmatic way where you can send a request, you know, in a certain format, and you know what you're going to get back because it's been defined by the company that's, you know, maintaining that API. A good example that our founder and dean, Avi Flambaum, likes to use is kind of like it's actually like going to a restaurant. So you can think of an API. If I walked into a restaurant and I really, really wanted, you know, mac and cheese, when I walk in that door, I'm not just gonna keep walking back to the kitchen and start like, grabbing some cheese and some noodles and making my own mac and cheese. No way, like it's not gonna, you would never have the kitchen be publicly available like that. Instead, the restaurant has a predefined interface where there's a waiter, he walks over, he brings me a menu with a bunch of predefined options. I can choose from any of those specific options. I'll choose one off of that interface, the menu, and then the waiter runs it back to the kitchen, gives him my request, be like, yo, she really wants mac and cheese. And then later, they do their thing, and then I'm gonna receive that mac and cheese afterwards. And everybody knows what to expect. It's on the menu, I know what I'm getting. When I make that request, they know exactly what they're gonna prepare, and they give it right back to me. It's kind of the same way with data. That's how APIs work. So if we do, if we stick with Twitter, for example, so you can interact with the Twitter interface where you say, oh, give me back all the tweets, from Kate Travers. And so it'll make that request. Twitter's developers have defined, what that request should look like. And so if you do it in a valid way, you will get back all my tweets. And then you can, I don't know, put them up on your blog or whatever you want to do. So that's really all it is. It's just this nice little, predefining how that conversation needs to take place. So that's all it is. That's all APIs are, just a nice way to talk to data and get back the data you want. Okay, cool. All right, so here's a cute one. I like talking about this guy. This little cutie is the Ship It squirrel. If your engineers are kind of, if you're in an open office and you see your development team, they just start like slacking a bunch of pictures of squirrels, or there's squirrels everywhere up on their board. They have not lost their minds. I mean, maybe they have, but they haven't. There's a reason. And this little squirrel guy is kind of the unofficial mascot of shipping code. Kind of the folklore behind him is the team at the engineers at GitHub, which GitHub is a company where it maintains this place where you can store all your code, and tons of people use GitHub. There's so many companies who are on there, US government, Facebook, most, a lot of open source code and a lot of non-open source code lives on GitHub. So they've got a lot of great engineers working, and they actually I'll send in the resources, there's some links. No one knows exactly how this specific squirrel became the Ship It squirrel, but it was some kind of inside joke. They started posting him everywhere, and he caught on. And so it's kind of been adopted by the entire industry as the universal sign of, hey, that code looks really great. Let's go ahead and push it up to production so that it's live to all of our users. When we talk about shipping things like shipping features, that's what that means. It means that you have something you've been working on, it's ready to go live, and then when you push it live, you are shipping it. And your teammates will probably look at your code and they'll post a bunch of pictures of squirrels on it, because, why not? Anyway, developers are goofy. Here's the something else you can use if you're too clever for Ship It squirrel, you can really start getting creative. Anyway, engineers, we have fun. We're all giant dorks. So anyway, that is probably plenty of vocabulary. Does anyone have kind of went through that super fast? The next section that we can talk about is I'm going to get into some of the common misconceptions about engineers and vice versa, technical and non-technical people. And some of that language will probably come up again, so we'll use it in context and give people some better examples. So let's look at, so I think one extremely common misconception about engineers is that we are antisocial. Engineers hate talking to people. All they want to do is they want to, sit behind all their monitors. They have this monitor for us. We have our big, muff headphones on, tune out the world, and just write code all day. That's all. That's what developers really want. Exactly. You guys have all seen it. You've seen your engineering section where they're monitor for us. We're all kind of locked in. But the thing is, that's not actually the truth. And increasingly so, engineers are just as social as your average coworker. We really are. But what's happening with the wall of monitors and headphones, we're very, and it's definitely a cultural thing. Engineers are very protective of our precious, aka limited, attention span. It's really hard to hold all this stuff in your head at once. I mean, that's true for everyone's job, but engineers, we like to think we're especially precious, and so like our thoughts are especially precious, but it really is. It's kind of hard if you're like thinking like doing super complex math problem. If you're interrupted in the middle of it, there's actually a big cost of being ripped out of that, of kind of breaking that flow. You'll get distracted, do another thing, and then it might take you like, 10, 15, 20 minutes to get back to wrapping your head around this really tricky thing you were working on. And, by then, like, I mean, who knows? Then, I don't know, then you have to go to a meeting and it's lost, and, whatever genius, code you were trying to write is gone forever. So anyway, that's, whether it's true or not that we have complicated things juggling around in there, all of that stuff is simply a protective measure where we're like trying to be extra safe about protecting our attention spans. So how do we get around this? Because look, you got to talk to engineers. It's just a necessity. One way you can do it, and what I do strongly encourage, is it's really just a matter of choosing the appropriate channel. Think about the time frame in which something needs to be done. If it's an absolute emergency, and like an example of what would qualify as an emergency, that's something that cannot wait. It'd be equivalent to if someone like pulling someone out of a meeting, like knocking on the door and being like, yo, Kate, need you right now. If that's the level of urgency that you need, walk over there, tap the engineer on the shoulder, make him take the headphones off. This stuff is mission critical. That should be super rare. Is it an urgent task? Something that probably you can think of urgent, needs to be done within the hour or so, maybe the next hour or two. Choose a synchronous channel, a channel that that they're going to see immediately. So this would be send them a Slack, send them a DM, send them something that a notification of some sort that's going to pop up on their screen so they can see it and respond to it. But if it's just something general, I mean, that's when you can use, something that's more of an asynchronous channel, something that people can get to at their own time, at their own leisure. So that's something where email would probably be more appropriate. If it's just a general request, something that needs to be done within like, the week, done by the end of the week, done within the next couple of days, shoot them an email. And just that's a really nice, it's just a very, people will really appreciate if you keep these different channels in mind. It's a really nice kind of thing to do, where if it is just a general request, that's not something that you'd want to tap someone on the shoulder about. It's just, it's just keep things in balance with the level of urgency. And then also, and I probably labeled this topic this way because I've been rewatching The Wire really recently, but chain of command, it is super, super important. In general, I'm someone who's an individual contributor, I'm a developer, I'm not a manager. And it's probably pretty rare that you would need to talk to an individual contributor or a non-manager directly. It's gonna be much better to instead, if you have a product manager, talk to them, or if there's a director of engineering or an engineering manager and you have a request, they're probably a better source for you to go to. For a couple different reasons. They, unlike individual contributors like myself, they're going to have the broader picture of who on their team is available, who on their team is best suited to whatever your request happens to be. They simply have more information than the people underneath them. So talk to them first, and they'll be able to triage it super efficiently. That's their entire job. So in general, if you have a request or if you need something like that, talk to a manager, and they'll funnel it down appropriately, and it'll be great. Yeah, and everything will work out nicely. Cool. Let's look at the next misconception. So here's another fun one. So let's say you decide you're talking to an engineer, you're putting a feature request in. Don't bog them down with too much detail. I just told you we're super, super smart and super precious with our attention. So we're the experts. We'll figure it out. Don't get too detailed. Don't get bogged down. That is super far from the truth. One of the best things you can do when talking to engineers, you're going to want to be 100% as clear and precise as possible. There's not a lot of generalities you can make about us, but one that I think is actually pretty safe to make is you're dealing with people who are detail-oriented problem solvers. Any kind of ambiguity is going to slow us down. And so like the more blanks we have to fill in, the more likely you're probably going to end up with like a final product that kind of nobody's happy with. An anecdote that I like to tell to illustrate this is actually comes from, and again, this will be a link to this at the end, but there's a Salesforce talk I was watching where a product manager is telling a story about they're working on a feature, and one of the requests that they made to the engineers was, okay, so Salesforce, when an account is updated, I would like to get an email. Shoot whoever owns that account an email. And developer's like, okay, so I just need to send an email. Anything else? And the product manager's like, no, just the account's updated. Send an email. The developer's like, okay, send an email, no problem. So feature ships, it's live, it's out there in the wild, and sure enough, the first notification email comes through, and all it reads, it just says, true. So yeah, don't let developers fill in the blanks. It's not gonna work out great. Something like that, providing copy for that email would have been details that would have improved that feature immensely for everybody. And even I am all of us are guilty of doing stuff like this. It's terrible. You get in your head, you're being your weird little detail-oriented self, and you kind of forget that people need emails that, read like humans might want to read an email. So anyway, happens to the best of us. Great thing to do is just eliminate that guesswork. If you want an email to have text, it may seem silly to make that request. It's helpful. Give those details. The other thing to keep in mind when you are detailing these requirements, you can kind of go too far in that direction. One thing that I see happening relatively often is, especially people who maybe have some engineering experience, or have done it before, when they're requesting a feature, they're providing detail down to the level of, okay, well, I want to implement it this way, and you need to use this API and only that API, and that's what I want. And that will actually probably end up hurting the feature. What you want to do is you want to be extremely detailed about the outcome that you're hoping for, but you don't have to be detailed about the means, the way to get there. That's something that the engineers can actually, they'll figure out the best way to get you this exact outcome that you want. An anecdote about that is oftentimes we'll have teams coming to my team to request, and they're like, oh, well, I really need some data about students or whatever. Can you build me something that will send me a CSV? And so a responsible engineer, and a great follow-up question for that request, is like, oh, okay, well, you asked for a CSV specifically, but there might be something that's actually more useful, because your end goal is not a CSV. Your end goal, what you're actually asking for, is getting data that you can then analyze and draw conclusions from. And there's actually lots of tools where I can do that for you. Like, you don't want a CSV, you probably want like a sweet chart that's powered by that same data, that's already showing you that you can toggle with all these filters and blah, blah, blah. And there's cool tools like, there's a tool we like to use called Periscope, which is infinite. Whenever somebody asks for a CSV, I'm like, what if I give you a Periscope chart instead? That's a really nice tool for visualizing data that actually I can spin one of those Periscope charts up super fast, like way faster than it takes for me to build like a CSV parser type thing. So yeah, just be super clear about the outcome, not necessarily the means. Yeah, so let's keep going. Another fun misconception that comes up all the time. So I just spent a whole bunch of time telling you how much we love details. And since we love details, we probably hate wasting time, so we hate meetings. So don't ever invite, you know, an engineer to a meeting. They're just gonna be grumpy, they don't wanna go. Hash everything out in advance and then bring the engineer on at the very end, and, you know, just save them some time. They're so efficient and so don't want to be interrupted, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that is a major misconception. Maybe the most important piece of advice in this talk is this slide. Bring developers in early. So like I mentioned, so if engineers at your company, for the most part, you might think of them as just people who write code all day, but we are just as invested in the company as everyone else is. And so we really want to collaborate with folks to make everything better. One thing that engineers are pretty good at in general, again, making, you know, I think this is a pretty safe generalization. We're actually really good assets when it comes to brainstorming. And then also it's helpful to have an engineer in the room, given that level of detail, and we're kind of oriented towards picking apart some details. We're great when reviewing like kind of initial designs, and we can help with estimates, you know, like we might spot things that you're like, oh, actually that might seem simple, but that because of X, Y, and Z, that's actually gonna be really time intensive. So yeah, and at minimum, you know, all of that stuff aside, anytime that you have someone who is going to do work for you, giving them more context is going to lead to better results for a number of different reasons. You know, like, again, we can help with estimates, but it's also like we're going to be more invested if that's the case. You know, if we're there in the ideation phase, we really feel like we have a stake, you know, in building this stuff, and so we'll build it even better because we're totally in there. It's super helpful. And there's a really good, I'm going to give you a quote that I really like. There's a link to this blog post at the end. But one thing that I've seen at most of the companies I've worked at is a tendency in a lot of companies, even super techie ones, to insulate their development teams from the business side of things. You know, and maybe that's because, you know, they're trying to reduce, you know, randomization, make things more efficient, but it's kind of a sideways way of thinking because it expects people to execute on tasks without any context, you know, without understanding the vision, the strategy, tactics, or, you know, the customer. And so that's a huge problem right there. People are going to be motivated the most when they share a vision, you know, of what this future is going to be, what this project is going to be, and they can see themselves and their contributions in that picture. So yeah, bring developers in early. It'll help things get estimated better brainstorming, and it'll help with motivation or retention and just all kinds of good stuff. So yeah, totally stress the importance of that. All right, so here we get to the most interactive kind of part of this talk. So get ready to throw some stuff into chat. We're going to go through some exercises, which hopefully will be pretty fun here. Some common scenarios. So we're gonna talk about. I'm gonna show you some interactions, and we're gonna talk about what went well, what could have been better. Is this an example of good communication or not? So let's kick it off. All right. So this is an example. Most of these examples actually are drawn directly from real life. Most of them come from our previous technical lead, Spencer Rogers at Flatiron School. He's now at University of Colorado Boulder. And yeah, so these are all real. These are things that actually happen in real life. So you have a project manager. This could be anyone. They walk over to the engineer and they say, "Hey, how's that password reset feature going?" And so the developer responds, "Oh yeah, I started looking into the Postmark API, and I installed the client library, but started running into some issues in my local development environments. There's this outdated library. We really need to use a different one for image handling." What is happening here? Can anyone can anyone translate what the developer was trying to say? Can anyone translate what that jumble of words? Cool, cool. So we're throwing out there, he's blocked. They're blocked on the project. Anything else? Anything else from that jumble that people think that developers trying to communicate? I mean, it's just totally, that's great, right? So they're blocked. This is probably, going to take a little bit more time than estimated. It's going slower than they expected. True, totally true. I mean, it does just kind of boil down to like, the project manager's like, yo, how's it going? And the developer's like, I'm working on it. Those like 5 words would have been a way better response than like that wall of text, that they kind of threw at their project manager instead. Let's put ourselves in the project manager's shoes. How do you think they're feeling when they get an answer like this? Like, if this is what they're hearing, oh no. Yeah, so maybe they feel maybe they feel dumb. That's one of the answers. The developers just rattled off a whole bunch of terms, like, oh, I'm talking about APIs and local development environments and outdated libraries. Okay, great. That might not have any meaning for the project manager whatsoever. They don't know what does that actually mean, especially as it relates to like a status update. Totally. These are great. Okay, so a couple more responses. So it's like if the project manager hears that, they're going to be confused. They're like, well, wait a second. I asked you how's it going. You didn't answer my question. Is this going to be on schedule? Is this going to take more time than we originally estimated? So yeah, let's think about it. So a better response, if we'll jump back into the engineer's shoes. What would have been a better response for them to say if they were perhaps aware of information that would have been directly useful to their project manager? What's a better way of answering this question? We kind of touched on it already in a sense where it's like, hey, I'm working on it. It's in progress. I hit a blocker and we'll see how it goes. It might slow me down a little bit. That would have been a much better answer. And so one thing we can think about, because we'll jump back into the project manager's shoes. More often than not, I mean, like I feel like on a lot of teams, maybe you have this person who, no matter how many times you talk to them, the message just doesn't get across. They always respond in this sort of way. If you had someone like this on your team, is there a way to rephrase the original question to maybe get a better answer? Like, could we have asked it a little bit differently to maybe give this engineer more clues as to a better way to respond? So instead of saying like, hey, how's this feature going? Oh, great, this is great. So yeah, maybe if you have this person on your team who never gives you a concise answer, we've got some great suggestions here on how to be more direct with your question, because you kind of need to. So, one option would be like, hey, is the password feature going to be ready on time? Great, that's a great question. It's very yes or no. Your engineer hopefully will give you a yes or no question, and if they don't, then you've got bigger problems. Another one is everything still on track with this feature? Great way to rephrase it. Again, yes or no question. It's not open-ended, because really that's the critical information that you really need. You're the manager, you need a status update, probably because you need to talk to the stakeholders and give them a sense of the timeline. All right, awesome, very good. Cool, so those are some great reinterpretations of how that interaction went. So if you're faced with a similar interaction now, you've got some options on how to improve that conversation. Let's look at another one. Okay, this is a fun one. All right, so new scenario. You're an engineer. You're sitting at your desk. It's middle of the day. Marketing manager, head of marketing, walks over to you and says, hey, Kate, can you you please build us something to address the sign-up conversion by end of day? Can you build us something by end of day to fix that whole conversion problem? This is real. These conversations happen a lot. I've gotten questions like this pretty frequently. So let's break it down. Let's break it down. So what, is this an example of good communication? Like, is this a successful interaction for either side? Yeah, not so much, not great. Oh, this is great. It's perfect. There's some great answers. It's just like, no. And something like saying something, that's super vague. There's already a follow-up question immediately after hearing it. It's like, well, what do you mean by something? It's very vague. It's very general, and it makes a lot of assumptions that will need to be clarified. Speaking of clarifying, I've also been the person asking this question. I've been on both sides of this conversation. If you're the engineer, how do you think that engineer feels having heard that? Like, what's racing through their mind? Yeah, definitely a little bit confused. It's true. You're probably a little stressed out. Oh, exactly, perfect, right. So totally puzzled, confused. The one specific thing that was in that request was end of day. Why end of day? Where did that deadline come from? Oh, you guys are so good. This is so great. More feedback. So why does it need to be done by end of day? What is the actual issue with our conversion rates? What kind of thing do you want? Do you have something specific in mind? And all of this is zeroing in on this question is it's not really communicating what the problem is that you're trying to solve. And so it's very hard for the developer to actually be part of the solution. Cool. That's awesome. So if you were the manager, I think like a lot of the things you're pointing out here, we kind of know if you had something like this, you'd probably want to approach this question in a couple different ways. You'd want to explain the deadline, explain the problem. But let's put ourselves in the engineer's shoes really briefly. Let's say that you're at a company where, again, kind of like with that in the last example where you've got a developer who never gets a clue. What if you have like a person at your company who, no matter how many times you tell them, this keeps happening, this exact conversation keeps happening, you keep getting these questions from them, and it's just something you're gonna have to deal with and improve. Oh, this is perfect. Yeah, that's another point where it's like, I mean, one of the first problems is kind of what we already talked to. They probably shouldn't walk up to like a solo engineer directly. They should probably be talking to the manager, especially something like this. Like if you have an issue with sign-up conversion, that's a very big issue. I would talk to an engineer or I would talk to a manager first, absolutely, to get a better scope on things. But let's say maybe your name is Kate and you're a new developer and you're at a company and this actually happened to you. What would be a good way to respond to that manager to kind of help yourself out? Respond in a way where you can actually either move the conversation forward. What's a good way to handle this situation? What would you say to the manager? And obviously there are a lot of options. So what are some things you could say to actually help yourself out a little bit? I'll let people throw some out, and then I'll throw out some good rules of thumb that we use on our team and that I've used on previous teams in the past to kind of handle these scenarios. Cool. Well, all right, cool. So people are stumped. Okay, cool. We've got some responses. This is great. So yeah, first couple questions could be information gathering. Tell me a little bit more about this problem. What the heck is even going on? Outstanding. Or best option. Okay, so this is one of the answers from chat. I would strongly recommend, no matter what, your first instinct, and certainly my first instinct back in the day, is to, oh, this is great if it's a bug or a feature request. These are great answers. You guys are awesome. But oftentimes, especially with younger or developers who are earlier in their career, and maybe you're super eager, you're super gung-ho, you really want to help, you can actually kind of get yourself in trouble by your first instinct, following your first instinct, which might be, oh, okay, cool, there's a problem, he wants me to help, great, I'm going to gather information and figure out how to help them. A better response is actually one of the ones that Carrie just threw out here. First response, and this is exactly what we tell everyone on our team, if this happens to you, tell the person, no matter who it is, and this can be very stressful depending on their, their job title, first response should always be, hey, that sounds really urgent. You should talk to our product manager. We'll troubleshoot, prioritize, and the product manager can handle this. They'll get right back to you. And if necessary, stand up, walk them over to wherever your product manager happens to be. That's what we tell everybody on our team, because again, your manager is going to have better perspective on what's going on. Their literal job is to gather information. They are super good at gathering information from stakeholders. It's one of the things that I love, actually having like a great product manager on our team, because that's what they do. They're the ones who can get all that info out and then distribute it effectively to engineers who can solve the problem. This is great though. Okay, cool. So great answers, everybody. You guys are savvy. This is solid. All right. Oh, here's a good one. This is also true. Like I said, this is a conversation between, I don't know, maybe a young junior developer and the CEO. You're at happy hour, maybe you're at some kind of meetup or mixer, and for whatever reason, you're talking to the CEO, just shooting, shooting some info around, and you're like, hey, yeah, what's up? I just used this really cool algorithm to guess similar words using something called the Levenstein distance. It's amazing. The data consistency problem, should totally be fixed by the end of the day. The CEO just kind of looks at you. It's like, Levenstein did. Okay, great, but what about the landing page update I just asked you about? Sue, this is like two ships passing. Oh my gosh, yeah, same. This happens to me all the time. I will geek out on someone and be like, the Levenstein distance is something I wrote a blog post about, for Pete's sake. It is not riveting to anyone, maybe developers, but not even that many. Anyway, whatever. So this is ships passing in the night. It's a real misunderstanding of the purpose of this conversation. Let's try to translate. What was the developer trying to say? Any idea on what they thought they were getting across? Can you put themselves in your shoes? Why would you be so enthused telling your CEO about these abstract things? Oh, that's great. Okay, so great answer from Rachel. Hey, they're really proud. They just solved this really big issue, data inconsistency, and they feel super proud of making that fix. Totally, Joni's jumping in here. Yeah, they found an innovative solution to something that was an issue. That's great. That's definitely what's going on, and that's why everybody can kind of just be like, oh, poor developer, they're so proud. The problem is the CEO has different priorities, and so when they hear that, what do you guys think the CEO hears, when they get a thing like that? They're like, okay, cool, super not clear to me. Like, I kind of expect you to have consistent data, so can we talk about, actually moving, something that's maybe a little more pertinent to our direct business concerns? So let's do one question. Because again, this happens a lot. If you, as the CEO, or you as the non-technical person, are ever, I don't want to use the word trapped in one of these conversations, but let's say you're having a conversation like this with a very enthusiastic developer. how would you handle it? How would you, in this scenario, the CEO is a little blunt. Is there a way to handle this where you're not, shutting down this, super eager little puppy dog developer? Is there a way to let them down easy and respond in a way that maybe gets the conversation back on track? One of the things I like to think of is it's like, how would Barack Obama handle this question? How would someone get this and handle it gracefully, and not, where the developers still can feel super proud? Great. But then also to kind of get that developer like maybe focused on stuff that's higher priority. Cool. So we've got an answer where it's like, hey, this is great. Talk to your product manager. You can be like, cool. That's wonderful. And then instead of shutting the developer down, go to the product manager instead and be like, cool, I just talked to Kate, but I really need an update on that landing page. You are probably the person who can tell me. Nice. So let's see. So other ways to think about it where it's like, oh, I'm really proud of you. Like that's wonderful. I'm glad how is that gonna help the company? Like I was very concerned about this other thing that's gonna, that's a higher priority. Does this tap into that priority as well? Outstanding, great. So there are lots of ways to kind of respond politely where it's like, thanks, wonderful. I'm glad the data consistency thing is taken care of. I can't wait to see the results. By the way, what about that other issue? Great. But yeah, in general, it's nice to kind of understand both sides. Developers, certain things they're proud of. CEOs have certain things that are on their minds, that are mission critical. It's good to be aware of that in any kind of interaction. But in general, that's probably not the person you want to talk to about your cool algorithm. That's one thing I've learned. Although our Flatiron School CEO, and he's heard me give this talk a few times, and his feedback was, he was like, Kate, I'd love to hear about your cool algorithm. Let's get coffee. So anyway, there's always exceptions. So let's do one last example here before we wrap up. This is one where a developer is talking to their PM and they're saying, hey, working on this feature. Notice that some of these options, maybe don't make as much sense. What about this other solution? What if we did it this way? Is this an example of a good interaction? If you were the product manager and the engineer kind of came to you with this, what would you think? What would be your response to this? Does this seem something that'd be welcome? Something you'd be interested in? Is there anything additional you'd follow up on it with? Cool. Great, cool. So yeah, so we've got Sonia jumping in where it's like, great, that sounds very reasonable. And it's saying like, okay, well, thanks for that. I'd love to know a little bit more about how you evaluated your options. Why is this not going to make sense? Why are you proposing this other thing? Great, that's really, those are both very, very good interpretations. In general, this is actually, I like this example. This is, in my mind, this is an example of very good interaction between a developer and their manager. The basic translation is like, hey, I was working on this, but common sense kind of jumped in and I wanted to bring something to your attention. And this is absolutely as you want your engineers to be entitled to do this, that they feel like this kind of feedback, that you're open to it, that you're welcome, that you're welcome getting that kind of thing. The one thing, because the flip side of that, a way this scenario could have gone not quite as well, which I'm also guilty of, and this is one of the things I always try to battle against, a way this conversation could have gone wrong is if the developer had noticed a problem, been like, cool, well, this other solution seems kind of cool, and then just made the change without talking to anyone. That is what you don't want. That is a terrible thing to have happen. So in general, you want your developers to feel welcome to bring stuff to you if it seems reasonable. Yeah, absolutely. Carrie's pointing out, like, please loop in the UX. Don't forget your designers. Don't just make some, oh man, yeah, we're very guilty of this. This is something that you definitely want to work with your developers to make sure that they give this feedback before making an executive decision. Yeah, you don't want the engineer making executive decisions. You want the product, you want it to be a conversation. So this is an example of great interaction because they are bringing it up, you're talking about it together. So that you can decide on the best course of action with everybody involved. Yeah, this is something that drives designers crazy if you just make some change without consulting them. I mean, understandably, that's tough. That's a major source of conflict. So it's always great when you don't do that, and that's just common sense on the developer side. Over communicate. Don't just make changes on the fly. So cool. Well, we're very close to the end here, so I wanted to zip through the takeaways. So having walked out of this talk, some nice things you can do moving forward. Take an engineer out for coffee. Again, maybe a little self-serving, but it's like, talk to me about this talk. You can ask about what they're working on, ask about non-work stuff. It'll help develop just a better rapport, a better relationship with them moving forward. It's always nice. And if there are opportunities to hang out with people from other departments in general, like game nights, taking people out to lunch, grabbing coffee, it's a great way to just improve communication just through familiarity. You know, like these people aren't strangers anymore. They're people who, you interact with as, humans, which is great. So by all means, if you're having communication problems with your engineers, take them out and interact with them like face to face. Another way to interact with them is 2 and 10. Like, engineering teams typically have lots of opportunities where you can sit in on a demo, join that retro meeting if they have it, go to their code talks, attend cool webinars like this one. Also great, it'll help you get comfortable with the shared vocabulary, with the shared company terminology, familiar with the team, what they're working on. Yeah, and then the last thing I strongly recommend, this was something that got me into tech in the first place, was get into the product itself. If you're working at a company where there's a cool app that they have, look for opportunities to volunteer. Maybe you can help test, things like that. It's always really, really happy, or works out pretty well for people. So anyway, down to the wire. Last but not least, let developers know when you appreciate their work. So I appreciate all of you guys. Thank you for attending. Got a few short seconds back if folks want to throw stuff at me. We'll have slides. I have lots of resources for you. So we'll get these sent out so that people can take a look. All these different exciting anecdotes. So thank you so much. I really you guys are absolutely fantastic. Thanks for all the great responses, great questions. Yeah, thanks so much, everybody. Take care. Oh, and you can reach me. My email's at the bottom. If anyone has follow-up questions, feel free to email me afterwards. Kate@flatironschool.com. Always happy to chat. So thank you, tech ladies. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. All right, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Take care, everybody.